I'm Alastair Donald. I'm the Associate Director of the Future Cities Project and the Architecture Programme Manager for the British Council, and the Chair for today's session, From Tsunamis to Terror Attacks, Do We Need Resilient Cities? 5 years ago, we couldn't escape the S word, sustainability. And it seems to have faded into the background a little bit over the past few years. And in its place, I think to a large extent, has emerged the whole idea of resilience, a new kind of buzzword of the moment. And I've been really struck over the last while about how many different varieties of places that I hear the word. You know, in our work, we have the Human Resources Department who talks about running courses on resilience. We've got government strategies called Prevent, which is about resilience in the face of terrorism. And of course, we've got a whole plethora of organisations these days that talk about trying to create resilience within cities. So, what does it mean? Why has it emerged? Is it something that we should prioritise? And if so, what are the implications? That's just some of the themes, some of the issues that we want to try and get through in the next hour or so. So I'm going to introduce the panel in the order that they're going to speak. First up on my far right, we've got Martin Powell, Global Head of Urban Development at Siemans, and that's within the Global Centre of Competence for Cities. Second up on my immediate left is Christiana Fragola. She's the Regional Director for Europe and the Middle East of the 100 Resilient Cities. And also, quite importantly, I think for this discussion, former Regional Director of the C40 Cities Climate Change Leadership Group. Third up, on my far left, will be George Furguson, Mayor of Bristol, and most of you probably know him as well as the ex-president of the Royal Institute of British Architects. And finally, on my immediate right, we'll have Austin Williams, who's Director of the Future Cities Project and a Professor at XJTLU University in Suzhou in China. So, without further ado, Martin.
I'm going to make 3 very quick points and conclude with a short test. But don't panic. I'm sure you'll all pass. The first point I want to make is poverty, terrorism, urban unrest and flooding are increasing in the biggest 60 cities in the world without exception. So this is beyond a trend. This is an absolute certainty that big cities in the world are having to deal with these kinds of issues. So resilience really is about preparing, enduring and recovering from any extreme event or shock, and also further protecting then the city as a result of those shocks. One example being Hurricane Sandy in New York. It's quite well documented. The power grid went down. People had to be bussed from emergency rooms across the city to other hospitals because of lack of power. People didn't know which way to run, how to get out of the city, where to hide, where to move. People weren't informed. So you cannot get rid of this risk. You can mitigate it, but you have to accept that these things happen. So preparing, enduring, and recovering are quite key. And this is all about physical resilience. This is about infrastructure. This is about preparing our cities to cope with extreme events. Counter-terrorism measures, so cars with bombs can't drive into airports and public buildings. So truly key, physical infrastructure, physical resilience. Now, the problem is it makes us live our lives in fear. I have to teach my children how to not get pickpocketed in Barcelona. Did I have to do that 10 years ago? Probably not. I have to give them a safe word to ensure that some stranger doesn't ask them to go somewhere with them. I've even taught them what happens if the house catches fire. And again, I'm not sure when I was a child, I was given this kind of education. And probably most importantly, I've taught them how to reboot the Wi-Fi, which is something probably we all have taught ourselves. And I put this under the bracket of personal resilience. So we have to educate ourselves, we have to be aware, we have to build resilience within ourselves to cope with events in the city. Now, things go beyond our control. If you get caught up in a bomb scare in a busy train station, then actually technology can take over. It can divert you away out of the station safely, stop crowds moving together in the same direction, really help us improve our quality of life, help recover. But this reliance on technology, while setting us free to some degree, has its dangers. Now, this in front of me is a wireless receiver collecting iPhone data. And it has a transponder in it sending data to my phone. So I can tell you, hands up if you have an iPhone with the Facebook app. Quickly put your hands up, super. I can tell you your combined average weight is 11 stone, 4.2 pounds. And 89% of you relate that data to me, which is actually quite low. So 3 or 4 of you here have never put that information into the internet, which is strange. Usually it's lower. I can also tell you 34% of you have blue eyes. Okay? That's at least what you put on your passport information, 34% of you. 4 of you have the Ashley Madison app. That's the app for married people looking for a relationship. Now, that gets transmitted also with the code of your phone. So the names of those 4 people are... Austin? No, I'm kidding.
Martin Powell.
So I can tell you this is in fact just a memory drive, and everything I just said was utter drivel. But I can tell you the Uber app does in fact send 23 articles of data from your iPhone back to some tech geek in San Francisco or Los Angeles or wherever they are.
30 seconds.
Location, codes, remaining battery life of your phone. Can you believe all of that? 23 data points are sent back just by downloading the Uber app. So my point about this whole escapade is about technical resilience. We build our technical future in a way that protects us and keeps us safe. This is now becoming more and more critical. And really, where we can help and move on without it. Very quickly, my resilience should be embedded, hidden, designed in, unseen, and enhancing our quality of life, not reducing it, setting us free, making us happy to enjoy our cities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. Christiana.
Thank you very much. Well, I have blue eyes and I'm not married, so I'm out of Martin Powell's app, but I do fall into the first category. Good morning, everyone, and I think you all just passed the test of resilience and get into this room, which was quite challenging. And that ties me to really the question number 1, what is the meaning of resilience? Basically, resilience, from the Latin, it really means to bounce back, to climb back up, really, if you look at the etymology. And yet, I think that one of the reasons why I left C40 and joined 100 Resilient Cities with the Rockefeller Foundation is because I appreciated their vision of being much more than bouncing back, and much more than just dealing with disruptive events like the ones that Martin was talking about. It is certainly that, but the approach of 100 Resilient City, and I think the future of resilience, is about being prepared really for everyday's life, as well as for the catastrophic acute shocks, as we define them at 100RC. And so really resilience is about the ability to be ready for life, and making sure that when there is some sort of disruption, whether it is aging infrastructure, unemployment, or transportations issues, or a Charlie Hebdo, the opportunity is really about how to not only bounce back, but really bounce forward and look at what opportunity does the event really unveil for us. And so, for instance, Paris now is looking at what does it mean to be an inclusive city, an inclusive capital in the 21st century, considering that the social fabric is constantly under evolution, whether it is because of economic refugees or political refugees or just, privileged adults who go to INSEAD to get a master's. So there is really an opportunity through the holistic resilience lens that the 100RC has developed with Arup to look at the different areas of a personal human being's life as well as the city's life, and therefore approach not just physical infrastructure, which again is very critical, but also, do the citizens have basic needs met? Do they have the ability to progress through the social mobility and get to good jobs, even if they arrived from Syria, for instance? Or is the governance of a city transparent, or is corruption really obfuscating how the budget is being spent? Or is the infrastructure that Siemans could help developed in a way that leverages on the ecosystem so that we don't repeat the mistake of New Orleans and instead do use the marshlands? So that's really why I'm fascinated by what the resilience opportunity presents for us globally. And to the second question, I certainly think it is an experimentation. We are ourselves a living experiment as human beings anyhow, as far as I'm concerned. But I also think that it's very much going to be the future. And so to the last question, is resilience number one priority for cities? I certainly know it is for 67 cities that join us, and starting from Mayor Furguson, who's been an extraordinary leader for us, and as example of how sustainability and resilience can indeed join hands, because as we know, Bristol is also the European Green Capital this year, and rightfully so. And I very much hope that very soon it will also be a resilience capital, and not just for Europe, but for the world. So last but not least, I have here my stepson and my nephew. They're two, great guys. And when I think of resilience about the future, I think of them. Robert Hall from London First the other day here at the London Resilience Summit said that the best way to look at resilience is look at the parenting of kids. And there is really not just one thing you want to do to prepare them for life, but is really to support them holistically. And I think the same thing applies to cities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. George, your thoughts?
Well, there's some great things to bounce off there. Both Martin and Christiana talked about life, quality of life, about preparedness for life. And to me, that's what resilience is about. It is about sharing everything we have in the city to enable people to partake in the future of the city so that they can help define that future. And a strong belief, and I believe that this is what resilience in cities is about, is dealing with the day-to-day stresses that we all know exist. They may be poverty, they may be health, but there are certainly huge social and sometimes cultural differences. And if we can have a much more cohesive city in terms of the people within the city sharing the same objective, then we are eliminating one of the huge stresses that makes a city so much less resilient when it gets a shock. So resilience is about repairing the city, both socially and physically, and then preparing it. Repair and prepare is a nice, easy way of remembering it. And then preparing it for the foreseen and the unforeseen. Now, preparing for the unforeseen is always a difficult one, but it is, I'm absolutely sure that we're better able to face the unforeseen if we do prepare for the foreseen as well. I think resilience is about having long-term plans. My principal objective in Bristol is to make sure that in 50 years' time, Bristol is a great, great city that everybody looks to as a city that is one of where the dividend is not just about money, it's about well-being, it's about happiness, it's about the things that drive us as human beings. If you're taking a 50-year perspective, you've got to involve the very young in the city in that perspective and giving the young ownership. So I wouldn't dare not say this with my daughter in the room, but investing in our children and their children, not just telling them, but asking them, involving them, and making sure that the city is designed to be a very friendly place for them. Because that is, I think, the best way of guiding a really good city. And I think it's really important that we make sure that this is about people, which I've been talking about place. I mean, we're a coastal city, like so many coastal cities, and I think it's something in common with most of the 67 resilient cities that are going to be 100 that come under the Rockefeller umbrella. And so we have to defend ourselves against flooding. Judith Rodin, the chief executive of Rockefeller, talks about the resilience dividend. Yeah. When we're dealing with flooding, which is maybe a big investment in something that might not happen, let's make quite sure we get a dividend out of it, and you get the leisure and other dividends come out of the flood preparation. And then I think also dividend is, I think also a guiding issue is about prosperity, making sure that the city prospers enough to defend itself into the future. So it's people, place, prosperity, and above all, making sure that the city is a happy one that brings everybody together with a common cause.
Okay, thank you very much, George.
Okay, well, I disagree with most that has been said, and I was working out how to present a critique of resilience, and after this session I've got a discussion with an author who's written a book on China, and it struck me that there might be some similarities, partly because China seems to be very popular. Everybody wants a bit of the action, and it's partly a failure of ideas maybe in the West that we look to other places. So she says European governments lack the courage to rule, while China has evolved what she calls a mindset that keeps the whole thing functioning. And there's an envious, kind of sneaky envy about the way that maybe China keeps what Deng Xiaoping used to call stability maintenance. And I think some of this is going on in this resilience debate, not intentionally, not copying a Chinese policy, but actually there is something about China which has given some legitimacy to some of these arguments as an alternative model to rethink public engagement. So what I'm going to do is to try and look at three cliches of China and use them to turn them around to look at maybe what the resilience discussion is. Inscrutability of the Chinese, the secretive nature and the authoritarian nature, all of which I think apply to resilience. Again, Deng Xiaoping famously said that the pragmatic basis on which China has survived for the last 50 years is that it doesn't matter whether the cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. We do whatever we need to do. We're completely pragmatic. We do whatever we need to do to maintain order. There is no political integrity within China. I hate to tell you this. So we do whatever we need to do to maintain order. The Guardian, in an article actually looking at George's Bristol launch of its resilience plan, said ultimately a resilient city has to be one in which, in a crisis, people come onto the streets to help one another, not to riot. So resilience is doing whatever we have to do to avoid disorder. Is there any political integrity to this Western project? So in terms of the inscrutability resilience, Patrick Ottolini, who was the world's first chief resilience officer, said, "You could say anything is resiliency. If I talk creatively enough about a pothole replacement program, I could say that is an effort in resiliencies." And The Guardian says, and The Guardian is championing resilience, and I'll come on to this in a moment, says, "One strength of resilience is that it can address life expectancy in Glasgow, population retention in Dakar, and religious clashes in Ramallah." And this should make us pause for thought, I think, in terms of the overclaiming and to be honest, the fatuousness of some of this discussion. In the past, you would have talked about healthcare in Glasgow, development in Dakar, and politics in Ramallah. But now it's replaced with this rather vacuous discussion about resilience. It's everything and it's nothing. So for resilience, the process of discussion and definition and engagement is more important than the actual resolution, because actually it's not about resolution. It's about living with disorder, coping with anxiety, rather than overcoming it. Ironically, the anxiety is now seen to be a spark that gives our life some structure and meaning, and I think that's incredibly sad for this day and age. This is the frame of reference in which we see our lives. In terms of secretive resilience, the Rockefeller Foundation 100 Resilient Cities program is the leading philanthropic organization, which sounds very nice, but actually the Rockefeller Foundation says, quotes, "will select and work with 100 cities from around the globe. It will provide financial and other support for putting in place new city resilience leaders." In East Asia, in Singapore, it says it will negotiate agreements and serve as a single point of contact for mayors, city managers, and other senior leaders. Now, this is not a conspiracy, because I don't think anybody is necessarily in control of this thing, but I think this is something which is very harmful to maybe democratic mandate of local authorities. I still think it's quite troubling. And the final point on authoritarian resilience is Judith Rodin's book, Crisis is the New Normal, says that her job is to monitor those authorities that the Rockefeller Foundation fund, and The Guardian says she is willing to cut off NGOs the foundation is funding if they are no longer deemed to be performing. And when the Glasgow basically says they're really delighted to be part of this emerging agenda, they have to be careful, because Rodin says we're not in the business of only keeping civil society going. If they're not producing impact, they may have gone past their time of productivity. Okay. So I'm only saying that resilience is a mechanism for making potential danger into a permanent state of alarm, and that cannot be healthy. Thank you.
Okay, right. I was going to come straight out to the audience for questions, but actually, I think it might be good to just let you two have a chance to come back on some of that, because you know, a lot of what you were saying, and I think, and you, Martin, as well, actually, in your introductions, it kind of encapsulated the world, in a sense. What you were saying was the resilience is all about. So, Christiana, you said it's about basic needs. It's about you know, catering for refugees, budget decisions, infrastructure. It's kind of everything. So I think what I was taking from what you were saying was that, in effect, this is a all these things are political mandates which are being subsumed under the banner of resilience. So it's almost like the reduction of politics and the rise of a kind of much more technocratic form of dealing with cities. So do you want to respond to any of that?
Yeah, while Austin says he disagrees with everything being said, I don't think he really did. But I do think, I do think that resilience should, for instance, embrace anarchic behaviour in the city. It shouldn't be about trying to have a Chinese approach that is all controlling, but it is about understanding each other and each other's in each other's needs. And it's about long-term planning. I don't think anybody could deny that long-term planning is good for a city, but our political system militates against it. So we have to be very proactive in changing the timescales in terms of our planning. And that, to me, is the secret of resilience, is about looking forwards rather than just, and then, as I referred to the resilience dividend, about the good things that immediately come out of that long-term planning.
Christiana, do you want to add anything to that? Or do you want to pick it up later?
Sure. Well, I do agree that actually I appreciated the diligence that Austin put in trying to attack our proposition, but truthfully, to me, it's the great thing about resilience, and, you know, arguably can also be the confusing thing, is that it is indeed holistic. And it is not an either-or proposition. In fact, the purpose of resilience, and especially of the global resilience practice, urban practice that we are trying to spearhead, is that it is transversal and that it is meant to melt silos and not increase them. And it is meant to make, to your point, governance much more transparent and, yes, much more robust and less just subject to...
Is governance the same thing as politics?
Well, ideally, it should get to having, the politicians are the one who have an influence to governance, but our approach is about extending governance to citizens as well, which is why we have large stakeholders engagements, which Mayor Furguson is aware of. So for us, there is definitely a disruption of what governance may currently look like in certain cities, which may be much more just centralized to either the city authorities, or in some cases being very much regulated by national authorities, such as like in China. But really, our aspiration is instead to make sure that all the different actors of a city ecosystem can reshape the governance and influence it. And not just one last part about Judith Rodin quote on performance and NGO. I think that's phenomenal. I think we have had, as citizens and taxpayers, we had had enough of ineffective governance of NGOs. And yes, what's wrong with expecting performance?
Okay, I'll let you come back in after we get some questions. But Martin, just before we go out to the audience.
Just to respond to Austin, really, I thought he was so far off the mark that I actually checked to see whether he was in the right session or not. So that was, but one point he did make, which I thought was interesting, it's about coping and living with events in a changing world. And I think this goes back to the personal resilience piece, although all speakers actually mentioned this. And it is about protecting quality of life. George raised also far more eloquently than Austin. But it's key. I think we seem to forget that we have to keep our cities livable. We have to enable people to move around, get to work, find a job. get home, enjoy a park, go to the theatre, and we have to protect all of this going forward. And I think that's the challenge that sometimes we forget, that when we make places resilient, that we have to protect the very quality of life that keeps us here.
Okay, very quick response.
Okay, the quick response is that you're the guy who did the speech, which was half a lie, the 50% fabrication of your introduction. But mine was an honest reading of what's actually been documented and said, using the quotes as I went. Copying with living with events in the real world. That used to be called life in my day, okay? We didn't really have a structure and a technocracy and unelected authorities that were trying to kind of introduce mandates. And that partly is my problem. One is the framework of discussion problematizes many things which aren't necessarily a problem and sets ourselves in this kind of Armageddon mentality. Secondly is the idea that these are, I also don't like badly led councils and governments, but the idea that you can then impose an unelected organization which can actually then try to leverage support and fund it, if it's not going the right way, withdraw funding, that I think is really anti-democratic and problematic. And I think that the idea that, you know, we want to try and have a robust urban development and an urban scene, I agree with George on that. But ultimately, how you do that is not necessarily through, mayoral mandate. I do think it's an engagement process from the bottom up rather than from the top down. Yeah, you can say yes, but this is top down.
So questions or points?
Spontaneously, I must say I'm with Austin a lot, and my question would be if that is not a wishful thinking, what you're talking about, resilient city, because from my, what I got now is that you do not talk about, what has built in the past big cities. There weren't plans or politics, there were just people, people, engaging with their life and taking their things in their hand and then building big cities, moving cities, changing cities, which made it very difficult for politics or for regulators or for the bureaucracy actually to cope with these changes. And that sounds like, a board, which could have been in Brussels, thinking about you could regulate cities with an Excel sheet and tick off, what kind of spaces you've created. We've got now this topic about refugees coming into Europe. This is real life, and you can't cope, with a 5-point plan about resilience. So people take their life in their own hands, they build cities. And I'm actually a bit afraid of that policy to come through, because the biggest and the greatest places to be on Earth, big cities, have not built with any of these technocratic programs, but just by human beings.
If we strip away the word resilience, we effectively just have the same discussions that have been going on for as long as we've had cities, really. I mean, why do we need this word resilience? It seems to just cover absolutely everything that the city might be and add in this sort of element of terror. That it just, if we take that word away, then we just get back to worrying about cities rather than worrying about words.
Okay, thank you very much.
I spent a bit of time living in Johannesburg and working in Lagos and Khartoum through my work, also at the British Council. And I'm quite interested, I know that Siemans, the Rockefeller Foundation, are quite active in Africa in all sorts of development terms. I'm quite interested in the role you feel culture has in places bouncing back in cities, especially there are quite a few cities that have had I suppose, huge social upheavals. And I suppose beyond the needs, the basic needs of, water, electricity, all of those things. Yeah, the role of culture.
Okay, thanks.
On the question of top-down or bottom-up, could we not have a bit of both? Could they not meet in the middle? Could there be ways of facilitating the two, sideways even?
Hi, I was just wondering if Christina could address some of the challenges which you face in comparison to trying to build resilient cities in underdeveloped countries, v developed countries, and in democratic countries compared to undemocratic countries.
Let's go George first.
It's
First
very
question
easy
there.
to use tough words like technocratic to dismiss something. I don't take that at all seriously. I think that resilience as a guiding principle, to answer the second question, is a really useful tool. It helps guide me into thinking much more deeply about things rather than just reacting. And I think City leadership has got to be about that. And when it comes down to the second last question about top-down or bottom-up, I often ask the question, is radical change, the necessary radical change, possible in our democracy? Because you're always looking to the next election and always looking over the back of your shoulder at the people in your political party or whatever it may be. I'm independent, so I have a freedom. I don't have a political career ahead of me. I can do what I believe is right. But on the other hand, what I do believe is right is that I do try and inspire people as to what is necessary to change things. But on the other hand, I've got to and to listen to the voices, the genuine voices, because you never know quite. You have to distinguish a bit as to what people want to do. But we'd never have got into this crazy situation if we hadn't, if we'd defined resilience. The crazy situation we got in our cities at the moment, where they're completely overrun by cars. You'd never have invented that system. If we were thinking in this resilient manner 50 years ago, about 50 years' time, we would have much better cities. So I'm absolutely convinced
George,
that.
if you talk about, you mean that introduction of the word genuine in there, it kind of suggests that you almost don't think that the general views are genuine.
No, it's not about general
because
views.
if you take something like cars that you've just mentioned, I mean, that's the option that 70-80% of the people in the UK take to move around. Yeah. So that's a genuine expression. So you're kind of almost subverting the genuine expression of popular opinion.
No, because we know genuine. I say genuine, I mean non-political, because people use anything to attack a politician if they're coming from a political viewpoint. Genuine citizens' views as opposed to the noisy political views. That's what I'm talking about. The car is a brilliant example about resilience. It's about private convenience versus public inconvenience. It's about it's about the health of the city. It's about the safety of our children. Yeah, but it's a crap way of getting around in that it has made our cities into dirty, noisy, dangerous places. So we have to invent better ways. Now, I'm sure the car has a great... Same number of people own cars in Copenhagen per head of population as they do in Bristol. But they only use them so much more sensibly. So I'm not against the car, but I am saying that we do need to think much more broadly rather than simply reacting to people's selfish concern about how they get from A to B. We've got to think about what happens in the quality of life between A and B.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'd only say that selfish might be expressed as self-interest, but, so it is. Christiana, what do you want to pick up on any of these things?
Sure. One thing that I think we ought to bear in mind is that we are under a global time clock. Right? There is an incredible pressure that we're under, which is actually historically quite unprecedented. And there's definitely the climate change, which many of us are painfully aware of. And then in addition to that, and one of the reasons why 100RC was created is because we have a phenomenon called urbanization. And by 2050, 75% of the world population will be living in cities. This is also unprecedented. And so the cities of the 21st century are facing, at a very, very rapid timing, a conglomeration of challenges. So it is true that people have always contributed to shape cities, and I hope they always will be. But the point is there is now a conglomeration, a compounded set of challenges to be solved in a very, very compressed period of time.
Can I just push you on this a little bit?
No, can I just finish a little bit?
But you say that we're facing all these shocks and these challenges. But and Martin kind of said that in his introduction as well about this 60 cities thing are in a worse state than ever before. But I went to a session yesterday and listened to about the development of China, where the point was made that in the last 10 years in China, income levels have doubled. So poverty, Martin, I think that's a dubious statistic in your introduction. So I mean, we live longer lives, we live healthier lives than than ever before in the history of the world just now. So this idea that we're under this kind of shock situation where everything's collapsing, I mean, is
It's
is
not that everything
true?
is collapsing. First of all, Chinese cities are outliers because they're all new cities, right? Most of the world is not China, at least not yet. In Europe, most cities are centuries year old. So how are you going to upgrade infrastructure, sewage systems, transport systems to accommodate? I mean, in Germany, there are cities that are receiving like 400 immigrants a day, and they're like 5,000 people cities. So the issue is you cannot just take China and make it the rest of the world, right? That is a really, emerging economies and transition economies have a unique set of challenges. Then there are developed economies, and this ties to the last questions, that have others. There are common denominators, but the beauty, I think, of this approach is that it does allow, in fact, to customize it with the input of people. And that brings me to another piece that seems to be completely forgotten here. The first step that we do with our city is an agenda setting workshop where we invite way beyond politicians, NGOs, students, Red Cross, you name it, private sector, to help shape resilience for a city. Patrick Ortolini, who is our Chief Resilience Officer in San Francisco, who was mentioned earlier by Austin, and who will release very soon the resilience strategy for San Francisco, was a seismic expert. And right now he's becoming a social inclusion expert. So that is the transformative power of this approach. It is certainly about doing the same things that cities have been doing. I mean, last I recall, cities are not going to be satellite entity floating around the space. So you still have to face the same needs, but it's about to do them better, faster, and hopefully smarter.
Okay, all I'd say is agenda setting workshops used to be called elections. They were where people set the
You keep
direction
thinking
of
that
society.
resilience is about politics, and it's not just about, I mean, look, I'm not going to fight. If you want to make a new thesaurus and think that politics equals resilience, power to you. It is also about politics, but it's not just about politics.
Again, politics gets in the way of resilience.
Okay.
So you're free to make whatever definition you want, but
well, this is a
it just
discussion
doesn't make
on the,
any sense.
It's a
but
discussion on the concept of resilience,
Yeah,
which
but let's
I'm
make
just trying to tease out some of the issues.
Yeah,
from
but I
you,
mean,
which
I
go
doubt
largely
that
unchallenged.
elections look as agenda-setting workshops. Women die to be elected. They don't to have the power to elect. They don't die in our agenda-setting workshop.
Okay, Martin.
Yeah, I'm going to fire through all of the questions, but I'll do it in record time. To the gentleman at the front, I think big cities are built through big leadership. I firmly believe a mayor at the top makes a huge difference, and I include Bristol in that statement. Somebody once told me you can't have a smart city with a stupid mayor. And it's true. You know, you need somebody at the top who's leading, who's driving, who's making incremental change for the better. To the gentleman that suggests dropping the word resilience, it's just a word, you're right, but the reason it's bubbled to the top because risks are higher, expectations on livability are higher. So now we have to think more creatively about how we make our cities more resilient by another level of magnitude. Lady about Johannesburg, thank you for naming Siemens and all our good work.
No, she just mentioned
I can only agree. But the issue in Johannesburg and the work we were doing is the provision of clean water and reliable, affordable power. And I think this is pretty key to any city's resilience. But your point about the cultural aspects is absolutely key. We need cities to keep the very identities in which they are founded upon and created through time. That's why we live in cities. That's why we choose to live in places, because we like the pasta or we like the food or we like the whatever. And the bit of both, that's top down, bottom, I absolutely agree. And actually the most significant NGOs that I've come across in my former world working in London, for example, the Campaign for Clean Air for London. This is one guy living in a house, retired early, devotes his life to proving to London that they have very significant hotspots of poor air quality, raising this at the right forum and the right places. He's now got one of the most significant organisations that people listen to. He's very effective. The mayor doesn't ignore him anymore. All that information and data goes up to national government to plea for more money. This is effective sideways engagement as well.
Okay, I'm going to come out to the audience again in a minute, but just very quickly, do you want to pick up on
Yeah, well,
very quickly?
in terms of frames of reference, there was a debate yesterday on crime where the guy who was presenting the speech came with the best of intentions, and he was talking at the end about the resolution or the way forward would be that everybody got involved in self-policing their areas or self-policing the country. And, you know, in some ways you could argue that that's a version of big society, that, you know, we all get together. He says that he always tells off people who throw litter. And, you know, we need more people to do that. We need more people to be engaged and to become involved in creating a civil society, if you like. However, the problem that I found with it is that he was using the frame of reference of crime. And as much as we're all potential criminals, that was his statement. So that, you know, we then all have to, ironically, you then are wary of all those people who you're trying to build a community together with, because you're always suspicious of their motivations. And I think that, you know, if you want to do a big society, even David Cameron actually recognised that you had to do it with a positive vision about how we can all work together. So in some ways, there's something to be said for, and I don't think the people on the panel here are misguided or reprehensible, right? And I think the ambitions of creating a better world, better cities, is obviously fundamentally important. However, I think the frame of reference is negative, and it sees the world as potentially harmful, and in some ways sees that harm as a wonderful opportunity to you know, enjoy and revel in, which might spark off new ideas. I can think of new ideas without the Armageddon scenario. I don't need to have that as my spark.
But you want to build a community of police.
No, I didn't. No, I didn't.
That's kind of how it feels like.
Let's come back to this. Right, can you keep the questions and points quite short?
2 points. My first one is I closed down my company when the congestion charge appeared in London. According to the Inland Revenue, the number of companies, London companies registered for VAT dropped. That was no solution to the problem. It's killed business. I've also spent some time working in Japan. When I got used to the everything, my desk shaking, you know, on the 7th floor every fortnight or so, but I did know how to get out. And the signs say the signs up here for exit here actually are way in Chinese and Japanese. So can I please have no congestion charges, and let's have some signs like north or out.
Okay.
The constant state of fear and designing against catastrophe all the time lives towards a sort of risk-averse and over-cautious approach to development. The idea that like the Environment Agency widening the scope of what areas are flood risk means that we end up spending endless flood risk analysis studies before we can go ahead with building new houses. So it just leads to a more non-productive economy instead of getting on just building things. I'm not saying build it in a flood risk area, but my problem is with the over-cautious approach to development we have that I think is actually preventing development and leading to a non-productive economy.
I'm fascinated by, I know we're trying to move on from the word, but resilience, there seems to be a lot of the word smart cities seems to be another one. And with resilience, what I've had from the discussion is that it's a transversal engagement, governance, something to do with governance, agenda setting workshops, setting objectives about, you know, bouncing back. But it does sound very difficult to grab hold of as a concept. But when George talked about long-term planning, I got some sympathy with that, because I think there is a need for long-term planning. I think we'd all agree with the need for long-term planning, but why not argue for it? Why not argue for it and do it? Rather than, and it seems to me, by looking to manage cities through concepts such as smart and resilience, we're getting away from the need for us to all rub together, work together democratically and define ourselves against each other and argue for what is the best way to plan for the future for our cities.
Okay.
I've come in from Venice, but I don't want to talk about flooding. I've got a question to the panel about whether they think that tourism should be part of the resilience agenda, because in Venice, UNESCO is threatening to move Venice from the World Heritage List, from flooding, to the World Endangered List because of tourism. And I ask this question because, to me, it doesn't seem like a big problem, even though tourism is growing to lots of European cities. Barcelona also seems to think that tourism is a problem? Does Bristol think tourism is a problem? To me, a lot of the things that you've mentioned about resilience, things like raising your children, I'll disagree with Austin. That's not life, that's private life. And surely cities should be concentrated on public life, on building houses, building infrastructure, and focusing on prosperity and growth. They used to focus on conquering other cities. I'm not suggesting that, but you know, let's be a bit more ambitious, folks, than concentrating policy on child rearing.
Okay.
I've got a question about funding. I work a lot in the urban data provision. Arup or Veolia, so it's basically seems to be resolving the problem that cities have no money by providing a loan to finance purchases from a very limited pool of suppliers. Could you shed some light on the funding of the program, and why is that a loan as opposed to a grant?
Hi, it's like more of a kind of technical question. When you're looking at making systems resilient, you have to be very careful where you draw the system boundaries. Otherwise, you make some things resilient, it has the opposite effect on other parts of the system. So how are you appraising what things you should strengthen and what ways you strengthen? And are you strengthening to a fixed endpoint, or are you trying to make things, okay, a difference between making something adapted and adaptable?
Yeah.
Just coming back to you, actually, as the chair, and your sort of apparent dismissal of the idea of poverty being a core problem in cities, I just found that really shocking. I mean, even if overall wealth is increased, inequality is greater than it ever has been, and that's at city level, at a national level, at a global level, and I don't see how we can talk about resilience or the future without considering that as a really core concern.
Similar to, I guess, the gentleman in the green T-shirt, just about how these different elements of the resilience agenda fit together. Martin spoke about kind of individual technical resilience in terms of kind of information security and those kind of things. But it seems a lot of the kind of resilience smart cities agenda relies on sensors and open data and kind of how all those kind of bits fit together, really.
I disagree with the comment about congestion charge. If London's managed to increase its population by about 1 million, whilst traffic's gone down actually terms by 8%, that may actually be why London can increase its population by 1 million, which of course leads to the question, do you want it to increase by 1 million? But my question is resilience. You've got to look into the future, and you could turn around and say one of the things is how do you cope with terrorist attacks? Well, no one foresee planes going to the side of the World Trade Center. There'll be some things we know about. We know about flooding, for instance, other things we don't know about. How easy is it to actually look into a crystal ball and decide what are going to be the issues in the future, given that cities are built for a long period of time? Re-engineering something is far more expensive than actually engineering something in the first place.
Hi, I'm just kind of a bit curious as to why we haven't really talked about. We have talked about the growing population in the world, but maybe we haven't focused on the fact that where this growing population is in the developing countries, where they are at more risk of environmental disasters. So surely we should be concentrating more on resilience for these cities where they are a vulnerable kind of environment as well. So they're more susceptible to flood disasters and other such things. We are in a global kind of crisis here as well. So there is, I think, an urgency to address these issues of developing countries.
There's obviously loads of questions on the table, so don't even dare try and pick up all of them. Just pick up 2 or 3 things maybe that you think are important to answer. You've got 2 minutes each. We've got to be out of here.
So the congestion charge, I agree with this gentleman, but please argue with him and not me afterwards, okay? I think it's a wonderful thing and more cities should do it. The overcautious development, good design, not being bullied by developers would enable much more affordable housing, and you can have much more resilient infrastructure designed into these places. So it's bigger than just overcautious development. In terms of long-term planning, I've seen a resilience plan produced by Holland or the Netherlands up to the year 2300. So when we talk about long-term planning, we go 10, 15, 20 years ahead. This is a place that's thinking 200, 300 years ahead into the future. And I think when we do that, we're better at thinking about what the problems will be and how they will emerge and how we're going to handle them. I'll skip tourism. The loans and grants discussion, I think the great thing about loans is that they go further. because the money gets recycled back, so more things can be done, and they reward, obviously, the things that are thought through well. And the poverty question, there are fewer people in the world in poverty. That's actually true, and the chair was right. But in big cities, it's getting worse. It's getting polarized as well. And I'll skip the open data thing. My final point is, it's hard to prioritize vulnerable cities of the future when 75% of the world's cities are, in fact, in exposed coastal areas. So it's a problem for most cities in the world. Everyone has to face it. We shouldn't prioritize it. We should tackle them all.
Very good. Christiana.
Sure. Well, first of all, I wanted to clarify a couple of things about our initiative and our collaboration. We are not about speculative debates. We're about building a practice, and we actually provide grants and not loans, so I don't know where that misperception was created, for 2 years. So we actually work with cities to provide a very practical and implementable strategy for just 2 years. And during that within that strategy, we very much hope and aim at having short-term implementation as well as very much long-term, and like in the Bristol case, up to 2065. So we definitely do believe in the value of long-term planning, but we also very much believe in the value of actionable, implementable initiatives. The New Orleans strategy that was just released has 41 action items that are indeed going to be implemented with platform partners, and that is a big part of what we also do. We mobilize the private sectors to team up with cities, but not about lending loan, but providing in-kind services. As far as resilience being an Armageddon, I definitely don't think that that's the case. I think that resilience, again, is about empowering cities and their citizens to bounce back, bounce forward, adapt and grow and even thrive. So there is very much an aspirational there that is about simply being not only more prepared, but seizing opportunities. And lastly, but not least, there is a whole piece about emerging countries versus developed economies that has emerged a lot. And the truth is, vulnerable and poor populations are everywhere. Like someone raised, actually, the gap between the rich and the poor is very much widening in northern hemisphere cities. And so the social mobility is very important in developed economies versus, providing more inclusiveness is a global issue. So we certainly are focusing very much on southern hemisphere cities. We have African cities. We hope to have even more in our upcoming third cohort of cities. But the truth is, each city does its own personal journey. And so how the city will solve those issues has to be provided with the input of the city. Our hope, and what we do through the network of our chief resilience officers like Patrick Ortolini, is that we will help these chief resilience officers to share, and we are helping. We just had our first event in Rotterdam with about 15 chief resilience officers from around the world, northern and southern countries. We are helping them to share what then worked in each other's cities and scale it up faster. So that's one of the things that we address, but we cannot prescribe for them. That is a personal resilience journey of each city.
Okay, George?
There's been a lot of talk about the language. I'm not bothered about the language. You could have 100 rub-together cities if you want, rather than 100 resilient cities. But actually, resilience is I think it's an incredibly useful guiding principle when politics does get in the way of taking sensible decisions sometimes. And, and even democracy, which is by far the least worst system, gets in the way sometimes of taking sensible decisions because you listen to too many voices and don't do what you believe you should do. So resilience is about having the courage too, I think, to do those things. Would you find any city leader who would say, stay away from my city? No, I mean, I saw a wonderful graffiti in Barcelona that said, tourists, save the world, shoot yourself. I then got pickpocketed. And that was nearly 10 years ago. But I think that it's vitally important that we look at the courage to do the right thing. Congestion charge was courage. It was absolutely the right thing. But if you looked at the Evening Standard in the months before it was implemented, you would have thought that Ken Livingstone was the devil. And he had the courage to see it through, knowing that some people, sadly, may have suffered from it, but the majority in the city and the health of the city benefits from it. It's far from perfect, but I think that is about leadership, and you've got to make sure that leadership and the resilience and smart city agenda all come together, because without leadership, it will be complete anarchy. But let's allow for that anarchic behaviour that makes cities really interesting within different parts of it.
Okay, thank you very much. Austin.
Okay, well, I was going to leave George's comment about democracy always gets in the way as a final comment, but I think maybe I'd be misquoting you if I did.
Yeah,
that.
you are. For God's sake, don't quote me as democracy gets in the way.
But the idea of like doing the right thing, it does beg the question as to what the right thing is, and I don't know where the debate comes from to decide that, because it seems to be centrally mandated. Obviously, when there are policy decisions to be made, then obviously this cannot be discussed with 60 million people. But at the same time, there has to be some kind of mandate in this thing. I think the problem about the frame of reference is a slight disingenuousness to the discussion, which is that it's just about making cities better and all the rest of it, and planning for floods. But we've always done that. We've always done that. Okay, maybe well or less well, but ultimately we're not stupid, and there are planning regimes and planning bodies that think about that. I just think that ultimately this becomes a political discussion. This is a political framework of how we see it. We all know, especially those of us who may have worked in architecture, that health and safety, risk aversion, over-cautiousness, precautionary principle are the driving forces, or rather the restraining forces, on the way that we now kind of develop and design. And this is a larger version of that, which I think is creating a climate which is pretending to be a spark for innovation, but actually sees some of those developments, some of those progresses, some of those advances that could possibly come out of it as being potentially harmful. Like the gentleman in terms of talking about developing countries and the population. This is an old environmental argument that actually population in some ways, by growing, by becoming more urbanized, actually consume more, create more energy use, create more carbon emissions, and that is inherently harmful. That means that actually we talk about a population restraint policy. And I think there's a really dangerous discussion underlying some of this stuff, not necessarily purported by the panelists, but ultimately I think we really need to be a little bit more critical and quizzical about what really is sometimes going on in these discussions.
Can I just quickly say, I said politics sometimes gets in the way of progress, not democracy. They're two very, very different
Can you just play that back, please?
All right, it's enough. I just think that resilience has come really from nowhere over the past 5 years to become, I think, one of the dominant frameworks of discussion about the future of cities today. And I think it's rarely ever subjected to any sort of critical scrutiny. So a session like this is just an attempt to expose these ideas to some discussion and some debate. And I think that we badly need this, and we need to take this kind of critical scrutiny of these ideas forward further, and try and understand just exactly what resilience is all about.